If you have your Bibles, please turn to Genesis chapter 29. We're going to be continuing on with the story of Jacob. We left off last week, and Jacob had left his father's house, Isaac, and he had traveled to Bethel. And there at Bethel, he had seen Jacob's ladder or staircase, and there God had promised to watch over him and to bless him. After that dream, Jacob decides he's going to build an altar and give God an ultimatum. Basically, if you watch over me and you bless me and you serve me, then I will serve you. And so that's the last we see of Jacob as he's making his way towards Haran, where he's going to go to Laban, his uncle's house. So there he's going to try to find a wife. And so now we're going to pick back up with Genesis chapter 29 and see Jacob arrive in Haran to his uncle, and let's see what transpires with Jacob. And so if you will, let's go ahead and let's read verses 1 through 15 of chapter 29. And then Jacob on his journey came to the land of the people of the east. He looked and he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep were lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. And the stone in the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. And Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." And he said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said, "Is it well with him?" And they said, "It is well. And see, behold, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." And he said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be watered together. Water the sheep and pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we'll water the sheep." And when he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now as soon as Jacob saw Rachel the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And as soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him into his house. And Jacob told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him for a month. And so Jacob makes this 600-mile journey from Bathsheba all the way up to Haran, to his uncle's house in that area. It takes about a month for him to get there. A month's journey is extremely long, especially in the ancient world where there are no amenities. There's no Marriotts or Best Westerns or any of those things. And so it's a hard journey. It's a hard travel of 600 miles. But they finally get there. And how old is Jacob at this time? Does anybody remember from last week? He's 77 years old, right? And so he gets there, and there's this large stone, if you will. So here you can see this trip. Beersheba is going to be the very southern end, the red dot, and Haran is going to be all the way to the top, a 600-mile journey, like I mentioned before. And so Jacob arrives. He arrives at this well, and some have asked, is this the same well as Abraham's servant? Because if you remember, when Abraham sends his servant to find Isaac a wife, his servant gets there, and where is he at? He's at a well, right? And at that well, he meets Rivka, right? Right? That's Rebecca in Hebrew. And so then, 100 years later, because how long was Rebecca barren? Anybody remember? 95 20 years, right? And so how old is Jacob? 77, right? So roughly 100 years later, Jacob arrives and he meets Rachel. So Rivka and Rachel. And so here he sees this beautiful girl at this well. And some have asked, is this the same well where Abraham's servant saw Rebekah? Well, we don't know, but it is interesting. It's the same place, same location. And so very well could have been the exact same well. And so he sees Rebekah, his cousin, coming to him. She's beautiful. And it says here that Jacob rolled the stone away. Now, this is interesting because most of the time these stones that would have been over these wells in the ancient world would have been extremely heavy, right? Very hard to move for a single person. Well, and Jacob moves it by himself. Well, that'd be pretty impressive for any man. How old is Jacob again? He's 77, right? There's not very many 77-year-olds impressing people at the gym, right? I mean, it happens sometimes, but not all the time. And so Jacob is still, despite his age, a man of youth and vigor, I guess we would say. And so he moves the stone away, and then he waters the sheep. Now, of course, so the adverse of this, if you go back to the Genesis account where Abraham's servant goes there, who does the watering? Rebecca does, right? And so here it's flip-flopped. And so he does this. But one of the things that's interesting to see is the differences between the Abraham story and the story of Jacob. Because when Abraham's servant gets there, as soon as he gets there, he thanks God for arriving safely. Then after thanking God, he prays to God to ask him for help in finding a wife. When Jacob gets there, does Jacob do this? No, he doesn't even mention God, right? In fact, the entire 20 years, the Abraham servant is in Haran for like 15 minutes. And we already get 3 references to God. Jacob is in Haran for 20 years. He doesn't reference him at all in 20 years, as far as Genesis account. With one small caveat. There is one time where Rachel says to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. And he says, am I in the place of God? And he's the one that shut your womb up. Like, it's not my fault, right? And so that's the only time where Jacob mentions God in the 20 years that we have him around. And it's not even that nice of a reference. And so there's quite a bit of difference between, granddad and grandson. And so at least Abraham's faith had permeated to his own servants. And Jacob, we can see in the last chapter, is kind of capricious in his own ideas towards what God is supposed to be in his life. And here we see him not mentioning him for 20 years. And so these wells are extremely important, especially in dry areas. We can see in the previous chapters where disputes arose with Abraham and Abimelech, and also with Isaac and Abimelech's men over wells there in Beersheba. And so Jacob moves the stone, and many have asked, was this a miraculous thing? And so Jacob stays with Laban for a month. Now, does anybody remember who was in charge of the bride price 100 years earlier for Rebekah? Laban, right? And so now Laban's still in charge. So it's kind of interesting that Laban is the one doing the politicking for what it's going to cost for Rebekah to leave home and be married. 100 years later, he's doing the exact same thing to his nephew. Now, what does Laban call Jacob here? My relative, my flesh and blood, right? Does he treat Jacob like that long-lost relative, that flesh and blood kinsman? No. It's interesting because Jacob, known as the cheater or the supplanter or the deceiver, is going to be cheated, deceived, and supplanted for 20 years while he's there at his uncle's house. And it's kind of interesting. It seems like, anybody have kids and like your kids act more like your siblings than they do you? Like they really take after their aunt or their uncle? Anybody? No, kind of, sort of? Yeah? No? All right. Well, anyways, looks like Jacob takes a lot after his uncle Laban, right? You see some of the stuff Laban does, you're like, wait a minute. Maybe that's where Jacob gets it, right? It seems to be a lot like his uncle. And so here in the next few verses, we're going to see what takes place. And so verses 16 through 30, if you will. We'll read that together. 15 through 30. And then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages shall be. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. And Jacob loved Rachel. And he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love he had for her. And then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go to her, for my time is completed. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her, and Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? And Laban said, it is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete this week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. And Jacob did so, and he completed her week. And Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. And Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. And so Jacob went to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. And so initially, Jacob agrees to labor for 7 years for Rachel, which is interesting because when Abraham sends his servant to get Isaac a wife, what does Abraham's servant have? What's that? Lots of money, right? They send Jacob away to get a wife. Where's Jacob's money? Jacob's going to reference a few times the fact that he came there penniless, that he didn't have any money when he arrived. So it's interesting that he would come here to find a wife, but Isaac, being very wealthy, doesn't give him any money, which is something the text doesn't tell us why or what happens, but it seems out of place. And so he has no money to give for a bride price. And so they send him to find a wife, but with no money. In the ancient world, you couldn't get a wife if you didn't have any money. I guess some things never change, right, fellas? All the men are laughing, women are not. Okay, that's what I was telling somebody. No, I'm not going to say that. I'm getting in trouble. Maybe I will. Anyways, I was talking to somebody. I was like, man, it's expensive, dating a girl. I was like, try marrying one, right? But not my wife. That's for you other fellas out there. Yeah, I know. I sent her a video of what I said last week, and she said, that's what you do when I'm gone, huh? It's like, nope, I'm consistent, even when you're here. No. But yeah, he has no money, and so he's got to work. So he's got to pay, which was not uncommon in the ancient world. You liked a girl, you wanted to marry her, you had to go get a job and raise some money and purchase her, or work for a dad. And so this was pretty common in the ancient world. One of the things that is uncommon about this story is that the average shepherd made about 10 shekels a year for his labor. The average bride price for a woman in this time, 2000 BC, from the newsy marriage contracts, which we are still finding even this day over around the ancient Near East, was about 30 to 40 shekels, which is the same price as the purchasing of a slave, right? And no, just kind of interesting when you think about that. You can buy a slave or a wife, either one. And so, why are y'all laughing about that? What's that?
Same price.
Same price, yeah. Same thing. Somebody else said that, not me. All right. And so, what's the crazy thing here? How long does Jacob agree to work for Rachel? 7 years. Now, what did I just say the average pay for a shepherd was? 10 shekels. So, how much is he paying for Rachel? 70. How much is the average price? 30. So he's paying double for Rachel. Now the text doesn't tell us why he's paying double. Maybe he just agrees that she thinks she's worth twice as much as the average woman. We're not really given a reason why, but it's kind of odd that he works twice as long as the average person would to pay for the bride price. Now, the bride price was to be a guarantee just in case, in the case of divorce or death or desertion, that the woman would have enough money to take care of her for her troubles. And so, one of the interesting things, what are we told about Leah?
But he does get a servant with the bride too. So he does get
he does get two. Who later bears some sons. So it's more like he gets like 4 wives, right? And so, but that's a good point. And so not only does he pay double, but he gets double in return. He gets a wife and a slave.
But then
right.
he didn't get
Not that pair. Got the other pair. But then he gets the other pair the next week. Right? And so, pretty dirty of old Laban, huh? You know, those in-laws, right? You know what I'm talking about? Just can't trust them.
I want to know why you can't tell the difference. Were they covered from head to toe?
Miss Joy, it's a great question. Well, you're getting ahead of yourself. But it's a good question. That's what we all want to know. So, what is the attribute we're told about Leah? What does it say about her? Her eyes were weak, right? Now, that probably is not talking about her depth perception, right? Her stigmas or whatever. That word could also mean delicate. And so it may have been, it's used other times in the Bible to mean delicate eyes, soft eyes. So she probably had really pretty eyes, is what it means, instead of weak eyes. So she, in the ancient world, eyes were seen as one of the marks of beauty, right? I mean, there's been many things done. You see this online where it takes the quintessential woman in like 1850 versus the quintessential quintessential woman in 1900 versus 1950 versus 1975 versus 1990 versus 2010. And the body shapes change, the hairstyles change, everything changes, right? The definition of beauty changes over time due to culture and other things, right? Does that everybody follow me now? Okay. Ancient world, across many customs and cultures, the eyes were seen to be a very important aspect of a woman's beauty. So Leah's got pretty eyes, most likely, but her beauty pales in comparison to her younger sister, Rachel. And so he wants Rachel, he loves Rachel, he works for Rachel, but Laban, Jacob, right? He deceives him, he cheats him, he supplants him. The same word that Jacob's name is derived from. And so, what is interesting here? Didn't Jacob, didn't Jacob, under the guising of his mother, dress himself up as his sibling in order to get a blessing? All right? So Leah, under the guise of her father, dresses herself up as her sibling in order to get a blessing, which in the ancient world is marriage. It's like the exact same thing. Like the exact same thing. Does Jacob like that? No. And so it's very ironic. It's very ironic, right? And so, the cheater has been cheated, the deceiver has been deceived, the supplanter has been, well, you get it, right? You get the picture. And so Jacob's not very happy about what's taking place. But what's one of the interesting things is, Rebekah and Laban are what? Like, what cruel games they play growing up. You know what I'm saying? Like, they both have the same idea. Makes you wonder about that family. Anyways, and so Laban does this. Was this wrong? What Laban did? He tries to blame it on culture. In our country, we don't do it. But is it wrong? Yeah. According to the Code of Hammurabi, which was a little bit before this time frame, but the same area, this was illegal. If you worked and you paid, like say for Brittany, if I went to Johnny Shott and said, look, I'll give you 30 shekels to marry her. And he said, fine, all right. And then I get to the wedding night and he gives me somebody else other than Brittany, it's illegal. Like I can take him to court, and according to the Code of Hammurabi, he's got to give me back my bride price plus double. So if I paid 30 shekels, he's got to give me 60 shekels because he's committed a violation. And so what Laban does is not only wrong, it's unethical, it's also illegal. And so, but Jacob bites his tongue and he says, you know what, I'll work 7 more years for Rachel. And so the average man would have to work how long in the ancient world for a wife? 3 years. How long does Jacob have to work to get Rachel? 14, right? Even though, did God bless Jacob because he cheated his dad? No. Jacob's got a hard 20 years in Haran as a shepherd, and he gets cheated by his father-in-law. And so, back to Miss Joy's question. What on earth took place during the wedding feast where he had sexual relations with the wrong girl, didn't find out the next morning, right? I mean, that's a pretty big deal. In the ancient world, the weddings in the ancient Near East were pretty standard. You would have a ritual that would take place between the man and the woman. The woman would have been veiled during the entire ritual. Also, you would have had a celebration. You would have had a party. Sometimes there would have been heavy drinking, right? Intoxication was known to not have been an uncommon thing that ensued upon the people that would go to these wedding feasts. Remember, people were just as immoral back then as they are today, and God doesn't have a strong emphasis for the chapters in Genesis where he is outside of Abraham and his family. Also, as Laban and his family, do they worship Yahweh? They're polygamists. I mean, they are polygamists, right? They're polytheists. Right? They have multiple wives, multiple gods. And so, morality is not a very big thing here in Padan Aram, right? In Haran. And some have theorized maybe she was veiled, maybe Jacob was intoxicated, maybe Laban made sure that Jacob was intoxicated. We don't know. We just know the outcome, and that is when he wakes up, it's not Leah. And so Laban says, oh, hey, sorry. And just finish the week out, and we'll give you the other one too. And so that's what takes place.
The interesting thing, though, is Leah's the one that the Levites came from, that Judah, which was all that was left of the children of Israel by the New Testament, came from, David and all them were.
That's right. Which makes me think of Ezekiel 18, right? Where the Son will not pay for the sins of the Father, and the Father won't pay for the sins of the Son, right? The soul that sins shall die. But it's interesting because this is the story of Israel. As Moses is writing this through inspiration, the 12 tribes are reading this. And so they all have a vested stake of where they come from. And so it's like, hey, your great-great-grandmother wasn't even loved by our great-great-grandfather. Oh, sorry. Isn't that funny? It's like, no. But you're right, because what tribe does Jesus come from? Judah, right? Who comes from whom? Leah, right? Also, what's interesting is if you look at the names of Leah's sons, which we'll look at in a minute, there seems to be a different emphasis in Leah and Rachel, and that Leah may have had a deeper theological conviction, if you will. And so, good comment. Any other questions or comments?
So did they have another wedding and wedding feast and everything the next week?
That's a good question. We're not told. Laban seems like a jerk and a cheapskate, so I doubt it. But then again, he may have had one. I don't know, but we're not told.
So Rachel became his wife before he had worked for 7 years?
Yes, and so he gets both in the middle. And so Laban says, I'll give her to you now, but you still got to work 7 years for her. And so Jacob goes from being, and how old is Jacob when this marriage takes place? 84, right? He's 77 and gets there plus 7, he's 84. So 84 years old, he goes from having no wives to 2 slaves, which later become concubines, And so from 0 to 4 real quick. And so talk about a learning curve, right guys? I mean, that's just a lot to handle in a week, 2 weeks. Yes.
Rachel present or what? Did he keep her somewhere?
That's a good question. What do you mean by that?
She was present at the wedding. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
obviously, Leah was there.
Yeah. Good question. She very well could have been, she very well could have been veiled too. It doesn't say, but it does make you wonder. But that's a really good question for another reason too. In the ancient world, and I meant to say this, but I was going too fast and looking at my notes. In the ancient world, like when you get married, the woman doesn't go live with the man. Like that's pretty universal throughout the ancient Near East. Like the woman does not go live with the man. Even in the days of the first century with Jesus, the woman would not go live with the man after the marriage. What would happen is they would spend a week together. See some kids in here. Y'all should be in the kids class, okay? But anyways, they get together for a week, okay? And then the woman goes back to the parents' house. And so then, while they're at their parents' house, the husband can go there for conjugal visits, if you will, until a child is born or till a child is conceived. Now, during this time, the man is supposed to be preparing a home for his new family. And so the idea is by the time the woman conceives the child, he'll be ready to bring her and her pregnant state into his home, right? And so that's an interesting thing because Rachel's barren. So even though he loves Rachel, Rachel probably never leaves her dad's house. Now Leah does. 2 slaves do eventually, right? But that'll come to play a little bit later. But when you said, where was Rachel, that made me think about that. Because we don't think about that. We just think, oh, they got married and she went and they lived all together and it was, wonderful. That's not the case. And the fact that, she very well could have spent that entire time living in her father's house still, even because she had no children. Good question. Any other questions or comments?
I was going to say, talk about Jacob not talking about God. When Abraham's servant came, yes, he had money, but he evoked that God did this, God did this, God did this. So when Laban and Bethuel heard it, they said, well, who are we to stand against God?
Yeah.
I mean, he basically said, what he was saying to Abraham, or either he's saying, God. And they're like, okay, we can't look at that.
Yeah. But it also makes you wonder, Laban keeps giving these stipulations to Jacob, and what does he keep saying? Well, yeah, but Jacob keeps saying what? Okay. Okay. Did Laban try that with Abraham's servant? He did. Remember? He said, oh, why don't you stay with us for a week and let's think about it. And the servant was like, no, I got to go. Like, let's make a deal. Take or leave it. Like, we're getting out of here. And so it makes you think about, Abraham's servant. Like you were saying, he trusted in God and said, no, we got this is my offer. We'll take or leave it. But we see, because he knew that he was on a mission that was kind of ordained by God, that God was going to bless him. Jacob feels like he's alone in a foreign country. He doesn't have anybody to rely on, right? He's got no money. He's got nobody. And he doesn't turn to God in his troubles. And we're going to see when he gets back to Bethel in chapter 32, he sees the altar he made and was like, oh yeah, there is a God named Yahweh. And he did come to me in a dream, and I built an altar and I said, if you bless me, I'll serve you. And I have a lot of wives, sons, and stuff now. So I guess he was right. And that's when we see Jacob kind of put the foreign idols away and then start living his life. And we kind of see a change take place. Also in 32, there's also a different change that takes place. What is that change? His name, right? And so a change of a name signifies a change of character, right? And so really the changing moment for Jacob is 32. And so before 32, Jacob's not this quintessential, Abraham-like faith figure that his grandfather was. He doesn't have it yet. He'll have it eventually, but he doesn't have it yet. Brother Ricky?
How was Rachel when Jacob married?
It's a good question. We don't know. I don't know how old she was. I haven't looked forward to see if it gives her age when she dies in childbirth and done the math. We might have figured it out, but I just haven't done that. Good question. She's probably considerably younger than Jacob is, but then again, we just don't know.
You see the way people acted, behaved in when they lived such long lives. Obviously, they're having kids when they're in their 80s and stuff,
Yeah.
and 90s. I wonder if God shortened the lifespans because of that. Like people maybe make them more aware of their mortality or
Yeah.
something. Clearly, even the so-called great people of God were not all that great morally when we look at it today.
Well, like even if you read like commentators, even like rabbinic rabbis, like back in Jesus' day, they attribute the long life to Abraham to being like an Isaac, the patriarchs, because of their righteousness. But is Laban a righteous guy?
Right on up there when
Yeah. Laban's at least 140 years old when all this is going on. And is he in pretty good physical health?
well, mine was obviously still sharp.
He was still a shrewd individual, and when Jacob leaves, he jumps up on a donkey or a camel, and he chases after Jacob, and they're not losing the ground. I mean, they're catching up with him pretty quick. And so, like you said, if you argue they live long because of the righteousness like Abraham, then you got to say, what about Laban? It must not have been the same for him.
And I mean, when you look at all the genealogies, people lived a long time and got progressively shorter in general, and they certainly weren't all righteous people.
Yeah, it's true.
Did they age like we do today, or was it slowed down maybe back then? Maybe they didn't age quickly, or?
I don't think they aged as quickly. I don't see how, with just the references of what takes place. I mean, there's just not very many 70, I mean, Brother Ed probably, but there's not very many 77-year-olds picking up. No, I'm just saying, like, there's not very many men picking up, like, 200-pound stones, But, I wouldn't bet against Brother Ed, you know what I'm saying? So I wouldn't.
90-year-old women have been through menopause.
Yeah. Well, she had been through menopause. Genesis 18 says she had been through menopause, but she came back out miraculously, right? And so, we touched on it all in Wednesday night class. And so, yes.
I was just going to ask, with the fact that Esau, when he left home, when Jacob left home, Esau was obviously wanting to kill him at that point. Would that affect him not having any money, and also factored into him maybe wanting to stay in Haran longer?
Yeah.
If he went back home, what was waiting for him?
It's a good question. Did Jacob believe Esau's words? Or he just think, oh, my brother's just, he's just talking a bunch of smack, whatever. Yeah, when he comes back, right, he's super afraid. He's so afraid he actually sends his wives and his sons and lists of importance. He's like, well, I don't love this one as much as this one, so we'll send them out first. And this will be the second group. This will be the third group. And if he kills the first and second group, I can make it the third and fourth group and we can go that way. It's like imagine that conversation with your kids and spouse / concubine. It's like, oh, honey, you're going first. Why? Oh, no reason. Just go. And so he's afraid. That may have been why he arrives penniless when he gets there.
Looks more like they were sending away to get rid of him than like this well planned out, highly spiritual mission like it was with Isaac.
It doesn't match it.
Because they were bringing that bride back.
Yeah.
Contradiction to the custom that you described versus it's like, oh, we got to get rid of Jacob. Have him go over there and find out from our family.
You're right, because even still, you're right. Like it makes it seem that the question was it a hurried exchange for him leaving? Because, like you're saying, it doesn't seem to be well planned out. It's not like Jacob's coming from a family with no money, and it's not like they didn't send him away to find a wife. And so you have a rich father who sends his son away to get married, but he doesn't give him any money. The only way he can find a wife was to work for at least 3 years if he marries an average woman, right? And so maybe there's something to what you're saying, Steve, about the idea of getting him away for a while. Yeah. And so good assumptions. We just don't know. We just don't know for certain. Yes.
I saw on last visit here. For the most part, it seems with India, the dad's still picking the wife.
Yeah, we talked about that too when he was here, and that's still the custom. Aren't you glad you don't live in India, right? Anyways, our time is moving short. This is what a mandrake looks like. This is going to be important because the next chapter we won't be able to read for time's sake, but we will talk about it a little bit. Jacob winds up having 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. We've already talked about those 2 wives. Each have a slave. And so first he has sons by Leah. And so he has Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Those 4 pretty much in rapid succession. And so Leah names those sons. The names of those read like this. The Lord has looked upon my affliction. The Lord has heard that I am hated. Now this time my husband will be attached to me. And then Judah, this time I will praise the Lord. Does it seem like Leah's got a rough life? Her younger sister is prettier than she is. Her husband tells her that regularly, and her husband, who is also married to her younger sister, loves her younger sister more, despite the fact that she's giving him sons, and Rachel's probably still living in Daddy's house and ain't giving him nothing. Leah is going through a hard time, right? And so then Rachel says, if I can't have kids, my servant will have kids for me. We talked about this with Abraham and Hagar, about how in the ancient world, even in marriage contracts, about how that if a woman didn't bear sons, they get a slave, a surrogate mother, but that the wife would raise it as her own, but the surrogate mother would still have some rights. She bears to him Dan and Naphtali. Those names meaning vindication, Dan, and Naphtali, wrestling. And so Leah's are more directed towards God and praising Him, whereas Rachel is the one who names Bilhah's children, more about her suffering, her affliction. And she says, I've been vindicated, but we'll see that when she names Jacob, she doesn't feel like she's been vindicated. So Leah says, well, 2 can play this game. I'll give him my servant. And so Zilpah is a servant of Leah. She bears to him Gad and Asher. Asher meaning happy, and then Gad, let's see here in my notes. Probably has it in the footnotes of your Bible too. Was that fortune? Okay, so fortune, happiness. And then Reuben finds some mandrakes. Mandrakes are known in the ancient world to be an aphrodisiac, but also a cure for sterility. They're very common in the Mediterranean world. They're very rare in Mesopotamia, where this story is taking place. Many cultures thought about this. Egyptians talk about mandrakes. In Greece, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and sex, was known as the Lady of the Mandrake. And so Reuben finds some mandrakes, gives them to Leah. Rachel sees this, and she says, hey, I want those mandrakes. I'll give you Jacob tonight in your tent if you give me the mandrakes. And so Leah's like, all right. And so she gives him the mandrakes to Rachel. Does it make her fertile? No, because she don't bear a son for at least 3 more years. But because of Jacob going and laying with Leah, she has Issachar, and then she has Zebulun, and then she has a daughter. Rachel finally has a son, and his name, of course, is Joseph. And I have Jacob on the screen because I did it wrong. Anyways, and so she bears to him Joseph, which means what? What does Joseph mean? All right, may he add. But it sounds in Hebrew, the phrase is very similar to he take away. So, which is interesting because it takes away my reproach. So even though Rachel has 2 surrogate children, does she still feel like she's got a mark of shame on her? Yeah, she finally feels like that mark of shame is gone now that God has opened her womb, has remembered her, and has blessed her with a son named Joseph, not Jacob. And eventually she'll have Benjamin, not in our section tonight, but a little bit later on, she'll die in childbirth. So it's a terrible sense of irony that she longed for children so much and then wound up dying in childbirth herself. And so we won't be able to talk about the rest of this chapter, unfortunately, for time's sake. Anybody have any questions about Jacob's offspring, his children? Does the relationship between Leah and Rachel ever get better in this section? No. And so they always stay bitter rivals through this. And so one of the takeaways we have is consequences. And so Jacob pays dearly for his consequences. Had he not cheated his father, had he not had to get out of Dodge so quickly, maybe if it had been set up like Isaac's exchange was, maybe he wouldn't have had to work for 14 years for the wife he loved, right? Maybe there would have been a different outcome. And so for 20 years, he has to labor and toil in the household of Laban before he can finally come back home. Secondly, God is in control. It's not the mandrakes that opens up the wound for Rachel, but it's when God remembers her. It's not Jacob and his schemes that's going to give him a flock of sheep and goats. We'll see a little bit later on next week. It's God who's the one that blesses him with the offspring. And thirdly, poor attitude within the family oftentimes multiplies to multiple generations. And so that's a takeaway that we can have that we don't want to do today. Anybody else have any takeaways or comments, questions, concerns, considerations? No? All right. Well, thank you so much for your attendance and for your good class and comments. And we'll go ahead and close the prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this day and for the blessing it has been to come together and to study your word. We're so thankful for the example that we have of individuals from your word that give us a mark to shoot for, things to follow. But also, dear Heavenly Father, please help us to learn from the instruction of those individuals in the Bible to learn things not to do and how not to live. And dear Heavenly Father, we hope and pray that you'll give us faith and trust to do things in your will and your time and not to try to take matters into our own hands, that we'll be faithful to you regardless of where we find ourselves in a foreign land or whether we're at home. And dear Heavenly Father, please give us the zeal to serve you no matter what situation we find ourselves in life, whether it be blessing or whether we find ourselves in the midst of trials. Please watch over us and bless us and help us to be a light in this community throughout the week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.